Welcome to the Never Been Promoted podcast and YouTube channel. I'm on a mission to help you cut the time to all the things that are holding you back so you can unleash your entrepreneur. Hey, welcome to Never Been Promoted. Hi, I'm Thomas Helfrich, your delicious host. Why delicious? Because here's a good thing. If someone asks you how you're doing, reply with delicious. It will define if someone's actually listening to your reply or not, because there's no way they don't go, what? Excuse me? Really effective in a grocery store, because it kind of makes sense. You're shopping for food. Try it out. It's a tip to make engagement. But make sure you smell well, because you can't smell bad and be delicious. I don't think so. There's debate around that. We're not going to have that today. Today, we're going to help some entrepreneurs cut the tie to things holding them back. And you know, that metaphor really holds true, because there's things in your life. There's entitlements you feel like you should have, like a better car. I should, have this, or should have gotten that, or shoulda, coulda, woulda. Leave the what ifs for the future, not for the past. And if there's people in your life you need to kind of figure out, do that. If you have a knowledge you don't have, go get it. And these just become excuses and things that you just get, create a fear around, and then you just get in this cycle. So if you can learn from our guest today, not only kind of how, he built his, Kurt Johnston is our person today. To be fair, there's a T in his last name. And while he's talking today, I'm going to go through and edit the title of this, because I think it's wrong. But anyway, Kurt Johnston, a pallet, the analytics. We're going to talk about his journey and what he does for the world today. So if you can learn how to use analytics a little better in your business, learn a little bit from how he built it, we're good. Now, I have one simple call to action. Just follow the podcast. Apple, Spotify, if you're listening, just take a moment, look at your phone. If you're driving, just do it quickly so you don't get in a wreck, and hit that follow button. If you're on the YouTube side of it, subscribe, of course, but follow, because that way you can get the latest stuff. All right, enough shameless plugs. Kurt, how are you? I just noticed that the title has the misspelling of your name, which is good, because it's a good marketing trick for me to completely repeat your name over and over and over. That's Johnston.
Totally agreed. Yeah, I mean, I plus also some people may prefer the British spelling, so who knows? We'll go with that.
I don't. It's more of it's funny when we were talking off camera. It's very obvious to see where technology is automated, and because where you entered it, and where the human jumps in. So anyway, sorry about that.
I like that. There was a time whenever my wife was on the phone with somebody in telecom, and they were sitting there going, "Are you sure there's a T in your last name?"
Oh my word!
And it's
Let me check.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, it's fine.
You have a. I mean, throughout your life, I'm sure you're like, oh, I've had to explain this over and over and over. And, I have a last name of Helfrich, and I think that's the way you pronounce it. Unless you meet a German and it sounds way sexier. It's like Helfrich something.
Yeah.
I'm not a linguist, so I don't probably. And people are like, how do you say it? I'm like, I actually don't know. But you choose with it. But it's funny. The thing that trips people up is like, do you go by Thomas? And I'm like, that's why I wrote it. That's why I wrote it down. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Generally, you'd write it as Tom if you wanted to be called that.
I will. I know this has nothing to do with what we're talking about today, but as a data point, if you sign your email, let's say David, that may have been the guy's name, and I reply back, "Hello, David. Sorry for this," or "Apologies for that," whatever the thing was, to be more formal, and you reply back again as the person goes, "Don't call me by David. That's only if my mom calls me that." And you guys like 80 probably at this point, right? And I'm thinking, don't sign your name that way, because I don't know, because Dave seems more informal, and you were complaining.
Yep, exactly. You're like, I was just following your lead, man.
Yeah, right. Now, if I reply back Kurt with a C and no T, you can call that out. Like, that is 100% wrong.
Okay. No. I'll definitely keep an eye on that.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, look at that. The title changed. Look at that. Amazing technology.
Ooh, I like it. Yeah, that's really good.
Where do you reside at home? Your exact address, please.
Oh no, exact address. Somewhere in Georgia. No, actually, I live in Alpharetta, not far from where you do, apparently.
Yeah, so we're neighbors. I'm off the exit 11, so as close to Forsyth as possible without getting the benefit of their taxing. That's
Right.
for
Yeah,
those
that's pretty much true for me as well. Yeah.
you
So,
just go as far as possible.
right.
And
Just
then
one step away. If we had just gone one
right,
more step, we'd been better promised land. But oh
right.
well.
I just decided, we decided to pick as, Alpharetta. If you guys don't know, it's a suburb of Atlanta. It may be a suburb of a suburb. I kid, it's like a double bubble, if not a triple bubble. Um, depends on the neighborhood. We don't have a gated community, but if we did, it would be a triple bubble for sure.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. By the way, for those out there, visit downtown Alpharetta. Really cool, very beautiful.
It
Great
is.
time to go
It's
out.
really nice.
Very nice, great restaurants.
Yep.
I can't afford them, but like if you could afford to go to
Yeah.
restaurants,
Yeah. No,
um,
there's great stuff there, and especially around the holidays when they have their tree and stuff like that, and they have that play area for the kids and stuff like that, and the
mhm,
lawn. It's really really nice.
it is nice. It's very nice. You're in the analytics game. Do
I
you
am.
want to kind of start with, like I always say, start about 3/4 into the movie of what you do
Mm.
today, who you do it for, and then back up and tell us your story a little bit of how you got there.
Sure. So I am the founder and CEO of Pallet Analytics. We typically just go by Pallet. And it is a retail assortment optimization system. And basically, to translate what that means, it essentially helps retailers decide what products they should have, how many products they should have in their category, as well as how they should price it effectively to be as successful as possible. And Pallet does this from their preseason period when they're first planning kind of what they're going to be doing all the way through there during the active life of a product and category, all the way out to the clearance period. So that's kind of what it ends up doing. And it does that through a combination of some AI algorithms that are custom designed specifically for this use case. And then in terms of where that started, my first job coming out of the MBA was with Home Depot, and I happened to join at a very fortuitous time where they were doing lots of optimization work around different aspects of their business. And I got to be on the front row seat of a lot of that stuff. I got to be engaged in a decent amount of it. And so that sort of set the entire direction of my career since. And then from then, I moved on to working at smaller retailers, which kind of changed the perspective of the problem statements of retail. From a massive retailer, it kind of knows what it's doing, to smaller ones, which are, yes, they still know what they're doing, but it's a little bit more hodgepodgey. And then you have to kind of like figure out, okay, how do I fit into this kind of different space, and how does that change the dimension of my work? And so I learned a lot through that process, and then ultimately I kept going from one retailer to the next, figuring out that there was the same problems over and over again that I kept having to solve. And a lot of my friends were like going, you should create your company. You found consistent problem statements that appear again and again and again.
Right.
You should just have your own business. And it took me a couple of years to finally pull the trigger, but here we are.
When you made the move from the W-2 land
Yeah.
to oh God, did you already have a client or clients set up, or would you kind of go cold turkey? We'll figure it out.
Cold turkey, figure it out.
That will shrink a butthole right there. That will.
Yeah. Yeah. No. We like, the thing is I had some connections that were nice. But like, no, I had no clients just like waiting around for me to do something. It really was just a matter of they're saying, look, I think there's some real big missing gaps in the market for this kind of work. And especially as it related to like retail fashion, anything fashion adjacent, there was a lot of issues with the existing systems out there. And so it was like, how do I solve that? And it took some time and a lot of effort in terms of the data analytics perspective, but at the same time, it felt like it was worth doing. And so it was a little bit of a leap of faith.
Well, I mean, it's a lot of it, right? Too, because there are so many data analytics companies that claim to do lots of things, and some do, some don't. I'm not trying to
Right.
beating up the industry, but
Oh, I will.
kind of like
You
kind of like the name of our title here, seeing the story in your data. You can see any story in data if
Correct.
you look for what you want to look for as opposed to what's being presented. You
Right.
can make up anything, and I think that's sometimes the rep that analytics companies have gotten, is that, oh, we'll help you do this, this, and this, and they're like, well, but the same data tells a different story. So maybe take that just from like a first step of that premise of how maybe you built your company differently, to because I know that was a problem, and I know that's a buying challenge for
Yeah.
data officers, or probably in this case for middle-sized, more CEOs or CIOs, of how
Yeah.
we're going to get the right, or take the right data, or marketing, or whatever it is would be, right? How did you guys approach that buying objection, or was there a different one that you said, no, we have to do it slightly different to make it believable? I know you have your own algorithm too, so that helps, but
Yeah, so I mean, as it relates to seeing a story in data, every story is open to interpretation, right? Like you can have two people read the same poem or the same story and come away with different interpretations of what that means. It doesn't mean that any of the language changed, just like in analytics. It doesn't mean that the data changed. It doesn't even mean that what people are assumptions people are bringing into it are wrong. It simply means that when you're doing it with a little bit of an outsider perspective, you're probably going to miss some important parts. And one of the things that I kept running into when it came to working with optimization firms within the retail space, because I was a client before I was an actual purveyor. Um, so basically, part of that was the fact that I kept seeing, why do they keep doing it the way that they're doing it? And part of that came from the fact that a lot of the time, whenever you would talk to them, you would kind of learn that they came from predominantly a statistics and mathematical background, which in no way, shape, or form would I ever question or say that's bad. It's just the fact that if you don't have domain expertise, also, like that's the reason why I get a little bit antsy regarding some of the new data companies that keep popping up, because a lot of times it's like, why are you listening to a company that's never done your job tell you how to do your job?
well, because I think what happens is, right, you assign meaning to something.
Right.
So if you strip away the meaning without context, it has a
Correct.
different story versus. I'll give you an example. I used to listen to Dave Matthews a lot,
Yep.
right? Or even Pearl Jam for that matter.
Mhm.
And you'd hear songs or lyrics, or Mumford and Sons, another one example. And then maybe in the last 3 years or so, I've kind of been on a little more of a faith journey. And I hear
Yep.
those songs now, and I hear those lyrics completely differently because they're
Right.
found in scripture, some of the words they're saying, and the
Hmm.
concepts. And I'm like, oh man, like that is a whole different impact of what he's talking about, or they're talking about in a song.
Absolutely.
And
Yep.
that data point of context of, hey, that person had been on something probably similar, or they're speaking
Yeah.
that, in high school you wouldn't have gotten that, or
Yeah.
whatever. And I think that's the point of context, and assigning meaning to something. And 10 years from now, it may have a different meaning to me. Um,
Correct.
anyway, so I think that, I mean, I don't know if that's the right analogy, but that's how it works, right? If you don't have
Yeah.
the right assigned meaning and context, the data could be shaped into mean almost anything.
Right. I mean, the basic thing is the fact that so much of data science as a practice is built upon models and assumption and mathematical assumptions that have been in place for many decades. And most of the time, this was all directed, initially speaking, a lot of the early models were dictated towards, finance and trying to predict stock prices and things along those lines, which
Right.
makes total sense. And obviously, there are lots of systems that do that today. But the problem is that when you take that exact same type of algorithm and then you apply it to a completely different industry, if you don't know that industry tremendously well, it's not that the results of that algorithm are going to be wrong. It's just the fact that you're kind of making certain assumptions that there's similarity between these two things. And if you don't know enough to know what to question and say, no, that's in fact not true, right? It becomes a major issue. And so it's really from the standpoint of something they're saying, the most important thing you have to do with any kind of like AI or any kind of like data onboarding within your company, whether you're a retailer or otherwise, is you have to have some melding of the minds between the data side and the business. If you're doing data science without any kind of business acumen or expertise in that particular domain, it's a hobby. If you're doing the reverse, where it's all business experience and no data, you're just going to be very, very naive about some of the assumptions you're making that when you make decisions. So it really is bringing these two things together that's most important. And because of my background, because I came into Home Depot at the time I did, and I got so exposed to all of that optimization stuff and all that data science stuff, because before that, I was not a data scientist on any level. But getting exposed to all of that and then being so entrenched on the business side and the decision making side, I think that's allowed me to kind of straddle between the two worlds a little bit and act as sort of like an in between. And so I think people sometimes misunderstand, and they think that if they want to create a company, whether it's in data or otherwise, they have to be like the most expert person ever about this one technical piece, or they have to be the most skilled person in this other piece. And it's like, no, you just have to have a sort of a shared melded perspective that gives you some idea as to how all these things fit together, because fitting together is the hardest part. It's not doing
You got to
more
be
than nothing.
51%. You got to know it 1% more than your client
Right. I mean,
at a minimum.
the basic thing is the fact that, like, if we actually look at historical information, right, like most data analytics projects, whether it's AI, Gen AI, or otherwise, that tries to get embedded into an organization, they tend to only succeed around 10% of the time. The
Why is that?
reason why
Yeah.
that's happening is because the people who are making the business decisions don't understand the data science, and the data scientists don't understand the business. And so it's like these people don't know where to fit it in. They just see it as another way to improve their reporting, which is not really fundamentally what it's trying to do. And the data scientists don't understand the business enough to know how to fit into any of the process or the goals. So it's just, you have this weird sort of like two sides of the same situation, but you have it to where both are naive about the other one's capabilities. And because they don't understand this and they don't have anybody to kind of like lead them the right direction or how to figure out how to bridge the two, um, a lot of things just outright fail simply because this is the basic problem is like most AI, Gen AI, and all this kind of stuff, it operates on a hype cycle of they're saying it can do absolutely everything. It can in isolation, but the moment you're trying to figure out how to fit it into a specific puzzle, the piece has to fit. You can't just say I can just fit it anywhere. It doesn't work that way. You have to bring that business experience into the question of where do we need it to fit and what is it really good to fit for.
So I'm going to come back to that. Where do you use data? Because I think some people don't know what that means, and I'm going to come back to that. But is there an aha moment when you were first starting, as you got talk about your first client and what
Sure.
many aha moments you had to help you win the next client and or lose the current one or
Yeah.
whatever it was. So because that happens, like you set off the Mike Tyson rule, like everyone's got a plan until they're punched in the face, right? Talk about
Right.
your journey of, I got my first client this way, and here was my aha moment that set off the next chain reactions.
Yeah, so my first client was actually pretty interesting because it wasn't even a traditional retailer. It was me trying to figure out how small of a client I could actually take on with the new algorithms that we had designed. And so it was actually a TikTok social seller of all things, which is very data wilderness, Wild West. It's pretty sparse as well. So it was like, does this actually work within this environment? And so, first of all, it does, and that was fantastic. But what we basically learned from that whole procedure is just the fact that, like, I think we kind of assumed that even though we felt like the algorithms were good, we also kind of assumed that there is a point where you just simply have too little data to do anything with. Um, and I think a lot of people will labor under this assumption that because they have too little, they can't do anything with it. Um, and basically, what we kind of came around on that was just that they're saying, No, anything is better than nothing. If you're able to use any data for any purpose whatsoever, that's great because we were able to take something extremely sparse and extremely weird and strange and nothing that any data spec could have prepared us for. And yet we were still able to make something actually really happen for that client. And it just kind of gave us a lot of confidence, not only in our algorithms, but it also gave us confidence in the underlying assumption that being able to take data and just do something with it at all, instead of just worrying about, oh, maybe it's not clean enough or maybe it's not enough, period. There's no excuse to not using what you have. You should
Well,
always use.
and you can assign meaning to it and say, hey, this data, whatever, these, maybe it's client acquisition. Like
Yeah.
I love selling these because it's easy to deliver, it has good profit, whatever it is, but we haven't sold that many. And you're like,
Yeah.
well, cool, let's extract synthetic data or create synthetic data that replicates that at the same percentages. And
Right.
I'm giving a very broad, but the point is you can
Of
create
course.
data to help make some type of a prediction or a
Yeah,
direction of which then the synthetic data can exit as you put in real data behind it. You can,
correct.
and you also can weight it. I mean, you can say, hey, real data is weighted at 90%, where synthetics 10,
Yep.
or whatever,
Yep.
and
Yeah, there's so
and
many
you
different
develop new
methods.
algorithms around that, right? So of how to
Yeah.
do that. Talk about that a little bit, because that's like a whole different world. As not being a mathematician or a data scientist, you've created patterns that accomplish that didn't exist before, right? So it's part of your business. That's part of your model. Like you have IP, you have intellectual
Yeah.
property on. How did
Yeah.
you do that?
Yeah, the way that we actually operate is actually pretty interesting because of the fact that the algorithms that we built were based less on having it to where, so we don't just sit there and look at it from a longitudinal perspective. We look at it from an overall like village perspective is how we refer to it. Essentially, the idea of each product is its own little part of a village. And essentially, these relationships between these products and how they behave when they're interacting with each other, when one is shifting its price or one is being promoted and things along those lines, how does that influence everything else? And this is a very well understood concept in retail called cannibalization, but a lot of times it's kind of treated as sort of like a secondary step in the process to where you're like, okay, well, we're going to look at cannibalization afterwards and just see if our underlying assumptions would cause problems with this as an overall practice. But like when we were looking at it, we were like going, no, sometimes we don't get enough information to just sit there and say, you didn't give us enough of this change in your business or change in your product's pricing or how you were behaving around it. So therefore, we can't do anything for you. It was more from the standpoint of they were saying, no, you can learn from the overall offering as a category and as each of the individual members and how they influence each other. And you can generate a lot of assumptions to create new data around that information. So there's historical information for the entire category in terms of this very summary level information around history. But then you can take that and take these little interactions between these products and the influence they have on each other. And then you can apply that to those different historical trends. And that allows you to build in a lot of additional data that wouldn't be present otherwise. So you can run it through algorithms properly. The ones that we built are a little bit less data hungry than some of the other traditional ones, but at the same time, it still is necessary to do that sometimes. You have to kind of like build out enough of a set for it to get any kind of assumptions through.
Does doing your clients or new clients go, why can't I just use GPT for this? Does that question ever come up?
I've seen, I haven't heard it from any of my clients. I have seen it on LinkedIn and otherwise though. And I'm kind of like, guys, just keep in mind, it's a large language model. It's really good for summarizing things and describing stuff. That's really good. But the way that I always try to explain it to people when they bring it up is I'm like going, look, if you had asked ChatGPT a few years ago what the next big smartphone should look like, it would never have described an iPhone.
Maybe it's right.
I just saying.
It's one of
I
those things. You look back in history,
believe in
like
that.
politics aside,
Yeah,
there are those who view certain candidates and certain people as nuts, crazy, like, oh my God, but yet they've won. And so you may look back in 20 years and be like, holy crap, he had it
yeah,
right. We were crazy. Anybody didn't believe we're crazy. And then you might look back like, man, nope, legitimately nuts. Like, yep, didn't make, and you don't know until like the effects are downstream from where it is, and also you're assigned meanings to those things. And
yeah,
for somebody who's starting, let's say a data company, or they're thinking about it,
yeah.
first of all, frame their mind right. Are you really a data company, or are you a revenue generation company that leverages data? So is there a framing of where you position relative to marketing versus who buys it versus what your actual
Yeah.
value is? Or how do you actually think of yourself as an organization, I guess, is probably the question.
I think of Pallet as a revenue generation company and a demand generation company that uses data to serve that purpose. I think I get a little like I've talked to a lot of other people who are trying to found their own company or thinking about doing it. And the one thing that always gets me a little nervous is when they start off the sentence by saying, so we're going to use generative AI to, and I'm like going, okay, that's a little strange. Your
Stop.
priority should not be the tool you use. The priority should be, what are you solving? What are you fixing? How are you helping people? If you have, it's kind of like if you went to a mechanic and he came sit there and said, hey, I'm going to use a wrench to fix your car. The question would be, why only a wrench? why are you like why are you so focused on that one tool? It's a tool in your toolbox. It should not be the whole thing. That's not the focus. Why do you have such an obsession with a wrench? You shouldn't be obsessed with generative AI. You should be obsessed with helping people.
Well, and the problem, fall in love with the problem,
Yeah, fall
because
in love with the problem.
technology is probably likely going to be there to solve a lot of problems.
Yeah,
That doesn't sometimes help you sell it. Doesn't help you
yeah,
manage the implementations, which are, you need trust, access, contracts, things like that to get
yep,
it. Like that's the hard part of building a business like this, is that you're going to be asking for very intimate details and knowledge, which means
absolutely.
you have to get on an MSA and have a bunch of insurance. So just know that it's like, oh, we got this cool product and stuff. That's great. You're not big enough. You don't have revenue. You don't, you know. So when you're thinking of you're building your company, did you Home Depot, right? You get on that MSA, holy cow, like that's a big
Yeah,
deal. It's a
yeah,
huge company. It's hard to do, and they're going to beat the hell out of you in pricing because of it.
yep,
Walmart, same thing. On these mid-sized companies, the MSA requirements might be just you having a lunch, be like, yeah, I'll get you access. Like it could be a
yeah,
CEO.
yeah,
Was that
yeah,
an intentional strategy? And what? Sorry, MSA, Master Service Agreement. This is the legal agreement between you and a provider and a client, basically, that allows you to operate. And so the bigger the company, the harder it is to get on those lists because everybody wants on them. So they manage it down. Mid-sized
yep.
companies, though, sometimes it's just more relationship based to get it.
Correct. And basically the other thing is also the fact that the more I started looking at building the company, because it took me a good 5 or 6 months to kind of like figure out what was the positioning that I wanted to target and what was the overall strategy and who was I really looking at from a customer base. So the thing is the fact that the more I researched this particular like field that I'm in, tangentially at least, around price optimization or retail optimization, the more I kind of figured out was like, for the most part, there's a number of vendors who would be considered my peers. And if you actually add up all of their clients between them, it's like less than 200 companies. And it's like, but retail is ginormous. And like, for the most part, they're all chasing after the same people. Like they're all
That's right.
trying to get the Abercrombies of the world. They're all trying to get into Dick's Sporting Goods or Tractor Supply and all that stuff. Any of the companies that are doing really well right now. And from my point of view, because I had had experience in big retail and also had experience in smaller retail, it made me very sensitive to the fact that it was like, okay, based on the cost structure they built through fund investments, through just how much people they had in their companies, they couldn't even look at some of these smaller firms at all. They had
Right.
to ignore them because it just wouldn't make sense for them. And so that was one of the intentional things was, how do I help companies of much smaller sizes? And that allows me to avoid so much competition and RFP and all that kind of stuff, or request for proposals for people who aren't used to that lingo, but around trying to get somebody to do this job for them, or companies who simply thought no one was even going to try to talk to them about doing this job for them.
Well, absolutely. And here we got a question from LinkedIn here from another Kurt. I'm going to say proper spelling with a K. How do you see the balance between data-driven decisions and the human element and leadership? So I
Yep.
think that's an often disconnect of, hey, the data's telling you this, and
Right.
leadership goes,
Yeah.
that's great, but no.
Yeah. So the thing is, again, it kind of goes down to the fact that you end up having to have this melding of the minds because of the fact that data is never going to be 100% complete across the board. There's always going to be certain assumptions that you're having to make with any kind of data that you're taking in. And the big issue is that a lot of times the people who are most aware of data and most understanding of data don't necessarily have enough holistic view of the business to be able to figure out where it fits in really well and where are things that they have to embed certain filters or certain perspectives into when they're trying to come up with some sort of a recommendation, or how do you frame a decision. And that's where you have to have those human elements, those people with experience, to sit there and say, okay, here is where we have missing gaps. Here is where we have a challenge or a problem statement that we have just not been able to fully crack. And part of that means you have to embed the data people into your normal business operations. You can't just let them go into a cave and do coding all day long. You have to get them involved in the actual business. They have to go to the meetings that have nothing to do with coding. They have nothing to do with programming. They have nothing to do with data science. You have to get them acclimated to what does the environment look like so that I can take the data that exists today and understand this team was trying to solve this question. This one was trying to solve this. Otherwise, you have absolutely no idea what kind of target you're trying to hit.
Yeah.
So it's really that combination of framing the problem as well as understanding what assumptions need to be there, what requirements need to be there to make something actually actionable versus just interesting.
We have another question. I can't post it for some reason. My guess is because one was posted by an AI and one was posted by a human. I really
Okay.
don't know if that happens, but it's still an interesting question.
Okay.
Have you considered expanding to an AI integration? So what I would think by that meaning is integrating with AI tools to make them smarter, more impactful. Is that part of sometimes a strategy of here's data and you provide that as like a REST service or some kind of service technically to other technologies, or do you keep it in its own box?
I mean, in our particular case, because our algorithms were built very specifically for the use cases that we were outlining, I don't think we would want to go any kind of like more broad approach in terms of overall AI. It's really very specific to how do we solve these specific problems, especially from the standpoint of like, I would say fashion retail,
Hmm.
um, because that's a different animal than the kinds of solutions that were being solved in the past. Because their stuff doesn't live long enough. So a lot of the algorithms that existed before that needed a little bit longer lives to the products didn't really apply well to those. So trying to build out something that's specific for them means it's extremely targeted. So I
I,
don't
well,
think
I look at like any mid-sized retail. Like I don't know how you compete with a Home Depot. I mean,
sure.
Lowe's just copies them. That's their strategy.
Um,
Whatever Home Depot
yeah,
does, we do. Totally fine
yeah,
with that because it creates a secondary market, like our secondary, competitor. But
yeah,
then then this True Value who sits smaller store, more located. All right, so you can repeat that model from any industry. But I
yeah,
think data could tell you here's some areas that are gapped that seem to have demand. And I don't know how
yeah,
you find this data to do this, but that's what some really good data analysis and data science can provide of, hey, if you're going to have this retail to be competitive, or at least to crack through so you can become one of them, you have to find some tips, some spears. That's one of the use cases you can do, right? Is to help
yeah.
them position their product or service to what is kind of missing or smaller or not really fulfilled by the other competitors.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, especially with our business, it was really something they're saying because I had experienced so much of the optimization space by the time I actually created the company that I kind of knew what were the big pain points and what were kind of the missing pieces that nobody was talking about. So one of those things was the fact that a lot of it is very front loaded, meaning that in a lot of optimization systems, be doing really, really well during the regular life of products. You'll be doing really well during the promotional life of products. The moment you take everything to clearance, things fall off a cliff. And basically, what the cause of that is kind of hard to interpret unless you actually have worked in that space. And then you can kind of sit there and say, but if you do that mathematically sound thing, aren't you constantly causing this particular buildup an issue in inventory? And if you're not specifically looking at it from that standpoint, if you're just doing what is the most mathematically sound thing to do, in the long run, it actually ends up hurting you dramatically. And that's one of the big issues that you run into with some of the traditional optimization, especially as it relates to apparel. So for
Yeah.
me, it was like, how do we build this very explicitly to solve for those missing pieces, those missing assumptions, and kind of like interpretation of the information to make it to where it's very uniquely posed to help people in this particular space.
You know, I if we have a date, it's usually at Marshalls. Just say that. It ends at Marshalls. Just we'll
Yeah.
leave that at that. Marshalls, TJ Maxx, Home Goods, the whole route, right? That's what
Yeah.
you do. It's like, hey, where do you want to go tonight? Well, we could just, you could drive me around.
Yeah.
But here's the thing: I go shop there, and I find that the bigger the clearance rack is, why would I ever go look at the full price rack?
Correct.
But by the way, if something's on clearance at Marshalls, it is really not wanted because they've already
Right.
bought all the stuff that's not wanted, and now they're saying
Correct.
we don't even want this stuff. That's where I go. Um,
Well, to that point, though, I think it's also important. A lot of times, whenever we see things on clearance, whether it's in the store that actually created it, or whether it's on a reseller like a Marshalls or a TJ Maxx or Ross or whatever, I think the assumption that we make as consumers is this product really wasn't wanted. But in all honesty, a lot of that product, a lot of the stuff that ends up on clearance, especially in large quantities, it isn't because the product is necessarily bad. It's because what ended up happening was that the company did not understand how their assortment should be built in the first place. So how that typically plays out is that they'll assume that in their assortment, they need to have 35 different products. Sometimes this is pure guesstimation. A lot of times they don't really have any analytics telling them how many products they should really have. They just go with 35 and they just keep going with 35. But in truth, one of the things that we look at with pallet is, do you really need the 35? Can you do with 30? And the reason why that's important is because every other additional product, every other choice you're creating for your assortment, they're having to hit a certain bulk minimum purchase for their inventory to be able to get the cost structure down enough to where they can sell it at a price that they think is reasonable. So that inflates their inventory and they just simply can't move that much product. So inevitably they have to get rid of that stuff through resellers of some kind. So it's not even necessarily that the product is bad. It's just the fact that they just had too much and they couldn't get out of enough of it.
Yeah. I mean, and there's a lot of other factors go in. If some of this is relationship based. Hey, listen, if you buy this lot off of me so I can make my quota, I'm gonna, the next one you get an extra whatever,
That's correct.
That has to happen. There has to be on the buyer side. I need you to move this lot. I know it's more than you need. Take it, put it to your stores in this other, depressed area and put it all on clearance and you'll sell all of it right away. Because that's what and there's got to be a strategy for that. I mean, I would think that it's just more of like, oh, listen, if you haven't bought enough to fulfill your contract, they're going to buy the clearance rack so they fulfill some piece of the contract as well.
That's correct.
That's part of what you can solve is, hey, listen, you have to fulfill your contract. These are terrible relative prices, whatever it is, minimum. At some point, we already know that they're going to have a giant sale on whatever you're buying. Like that's when you're going to go fulfill it because right now they're pushing price to try to get their profits. And you can show that based on historical data of like, just wait to buy till this month or this sale or whatever it is. And so I'm being like, I'm trying to.
No.
You're using your data to counteract their data science to get the most. Sometimes.
No. I think fundamentally, though, what you end up finding is that a lot of people in these businesses, because there's not really an easy method or very super obvious method for figuring out how many products you actually need and then how to price them. It's a real big issue because at that point, they become much more susceptible to those kinds of arrangements that end up putting them in this really weird space where they have all this inventory. Their people in their stores are being like flooded with it. And of course, we've seen how many stores have pulled back on their actual labor. So it's like, it gets really, really problematic from the standpoint of like you just overweight your entire organization with inventory and then you put it on clearance. And when people walk into a store and see a lot of clearance, they assume the same way that you or I would as consumers, which is, wow, this is just a bad product. When in fact, it's a lot of it's actually on the buy side and not on the sell side. That's the problem.
Well, I like it because
trying to help with.
I'm a little taller or whatever, and I can find some stuff that typically it's not just didn't sell. And I'm like, all right, that looks great. I'll take that.
Right. But it's good that they at least have the option for you. That's nice.
Right, exactly. Tall and fat. Like that's not, they call it big and tall. Why don't you just call it as fat and tall, like fat and bigger, big and bigger. I got another one here. Someone who's anonymous. Here we go. What do you think about that statement? That data is only going to get more important, critical to the success of organizations. Is it the new oil for organizations?
I think it's always been the oil. It's just the fact that a lot of people didn't figure out how to burn it properly. I mean, like the companies that figured out how to do it and how to use it effectively are the ones that are going to be winning more and more frequently. Like Home Depot, having been there, I know they had a lot of data sophistication. But at the same time, it's not like they had everything figured out. Even the Walmarts of the world and the Amazons of the world don't have everything figured out. So I think the underlying thing I would say is that just because you're small, it doesn't mean you can't do something really interesting with data to learn how to be special and how to stand out. So
what's
don't
the investment like for them? I mean, like, so I hear that I'm like, oh, this is expensive. And so could you talk about for small companies to leverage your types of services? Because I think a lot of people say that sounds great. There's a presumption it's expensive because all the big companies do it. So, and not saying that you don't get your fair price for what you do, but I don't think it's quite price expensive because of the return speed. So I mean, like the ROI is there. Do you want to talk about like a typical business case that you get brought in on from the perspective of ROI? Because I would have to, I'm guessing here, but I'm going to guess the number one objection is what's it cost? Like, what's the investment?
Correct.
And when's my ROI? It's the CFO saying, I'm not funding this unless you have data to show data. So talk about that a little bit. Because if you're listening and you're like, all right, I'm going to call this guy because I never knew that you could do it like that. What would your answer kind of be to that? CEO, CFO.
What I would sit there and say is because of the way that we built our algorithms and the way that we approached our back end to our company, and the fact that we haven't taken on a lot of investment, that hasn't blown up our cost structure, in fact that we haven't built out our company in some massive amounts of people, the fact that we've been trying to be very conservative about how much we put into that and really focused on the technology side, which is a lot easier to scale. One of the benefits of that is the fact that we're generally far less expensive than the traditional options. So if you've run into issues where you talk to them and it became really scary, that's something to keep in mind. We're definitely not charging you an exorbitant amount, and we're not even going to start with an exorbitant amount and force you to negotiate down. We've come up with what we think is a very fair approach that allows us to scale based on the size of your business. So like, for example, I said the very first client I ever had was a TikTok social seller. That's about as small as you can go in retail. And we were able to make it work because it's just a small, tiny fraction of a percentage of their revenue. And then we're growing their business by anywhere between 12 to 18%. It's like when that's what you're talking about, the ROI pretty much is phenomenal regardless. And it still allows us to be a very effective business. The other piece is also the fact that because our algorithms were built, understanding that not everyone's data is going to be the same, and not putting all of the onus on our clients to give us the data, we actually work with them during the implementation to make it as fast as possible. So if you're looking at trying to get into price optimization or assortment optimization and trying to figure out what kind of products you should have, that's one thing to reach out to us. And we've been able to get up and running a test with companies in less than 2 weeks.
That's fast.
Which is unheard of in the space. So,
which means you're immediately getting value back. You're immediately learning something.
Correct.
And if your pricing improves by 0.5% every month, your year is killed. You've just killed your year. I mean, like, it's awesome.
So to give you an idea, the very first time I ever implemented another price optimization solution back when I was on the retail side of things, like we were 9 months into implementation and we were only about halfway there. So we had gotten literally no value whatsoever. We were just spinning our wheels trying to get them the data that they had requested. And all it would have taken to get it up and running faster is them embedding people into our company for a short period of time and taking some of the responsibility for building out the assets. And because a lot of traditional systems don't work that way, it ends up meaning that you're spending anywhere from 9 months to 2 years before you even get any value back or any recommendations. And that was one of the things when we were building out the system and our overall structure, we were like, that can't be the case. Like, small companies can't give me an implementation fee of any value and then go 2 years without getting any help. Like, that's
they can't take that. They'll never make that investment ever.
Correct.
They'll invest that in sales or additional inventory.
In our case, it's like, look, we can get you a test up and running in 2 weeks. After that, once you do the test and you're satisfied with the results, we can get you implemented within a couple of months. It's very fast. We
part of that's defining the use case too, right? Part of it's your upfront consulting of what's the use case we're going to go tackle, so you have the highest value. Then you can knock use case by use case, which creates projects. And then as you create value, then they start budgeting for those projects of, hey, it's cost. We know it costs about that. It's going to fund this 8-9 weeks. Do it because we know it'll pay off in your 15 months from now or whatever it'll be, right?
No. In our case, the payoff's going to happen within 3 to 4 months after you actually agree. Like, it's
so that's why. So you get an ROI in the fiscal year, which is super important for buying services. If I can pay for your services, they will buy more and more.
Correct.
That also positions you for the 2-year, 3-year investment that can't, like, there's no physical way to repay it, but you're like, we can do that. We know it'll work. It's a higher investment, but the payoff should be 100x. It's just going to take 5 years to do it. So you can do that, but you cannot typically position yourself right away into that, and you have to staff for that. So are you even chasing those kind of deals? Or are you looking for the quick use case stuff that's doing this, or
Um,
how does your business position that? Because that is a different delivery model,
it
multi-year
kind of
versus
it kind of
project.
works both ways. So for example, we do go for typically shorter term type of things. Like for example, we might go for a contract that's like a year, but then again, we don't count the year including the implementation. In other words, we don't count if you're just doing work trying to get it up and running, we don't count that towards your subscription. We sit there and say, no, until we're actually delivering something to you, you're not paying that. That's not your thing, right? We don't have to worry about that part. Once we get you implemented, you get the year contract. The only thing that we do is we have levers in place from a negotiation perspective that we provide to clients, and they're and say, hey, if you agree to 2 years, then the amount that we charge goes down. If you do 3 years, it goes down again. If there's other different agreements that we specifically built in because we didn't want to have negotiations be about a conflict where it's like, oh, well, you came in really high, but there's no levers provided to me to get it down. So I just have to argue with you. I didn't want people to argue with me. I was like going, look, I already made the base price pretty low, especially comparative to my market. So it's already low. I want to get you in as a client. I want to make sure I'm
Right.
helping your company. But at the same time, I even give you specific levers that you can pull to get it even lower. And that's
Yeah,
fine with me.
that's right. Just conscious of time. So if you give me the 60-second thing you would say to yourself if you were starting over again.
Oh God.
Not now, because you can make that claim and start over. I'm saying you go back. What would be
Yeah.
you tell yourself?
Um, I would probably there were a number. So I think it would come down to try to get someone interested before you actually like quit your job. Like I know that Shark Tank teaches us, are you fully invested? Are you 100% in, or do you still have a day job? Uh, honestly, it's really stressful on your family to start something without something already kind of in the wings. When you're starting something completely from scratch, it's extraordinarily stressful and anxiety
You got to
inducing.
have some because you have to remove the safety net to be all in, because I don't
Yeah,
think you can ever accomplish what you can really do without it. But I agree with you. Get at least one signed up,
yeah,
working on it. Take away your Netflix on the weekends, work through it, do whatever you got to
yeah,
do. Then it's a lot easier to make that move, or get laid off or asked to leave like I did, and just not
yeah.
be able to get rehired, and now you're in it.
Yeah, and the thing is though, for the most part, like I would sit there and say again, yes, you have to be all in, but at the same time, it's like your calculus changes around decision making when you're a parent, when you have a family to support and all that kind
Right.
of stuff. Like your calculus has to be a little different. So I always find it strange when I hear people who are like Shark Tank people who are like, well, you should be all in, you should have quit your job, you should do all this stuff, and I'm
Yeah.
like going, like, dude, you created your company when you were in college. Like you didn't have these kinds of issues, these kinds of things that you had to take care of. Like I didn't actually create my company, even though I had friends telling me for years I should, until my student loans were paid off, until a lot of things got
Well,
paid off.
I'll leave people with this. Like, right, first of all, Shark Tank isn't real.
Yeah,
It's a show. It's produced. It's
correct.
made for drama.
Yeah,
It's stop and stop trying to raise money and just go out there and raise hell. Go sell
yeah, yeah,
shit.
yeah.
And stop
It's like,
doing that. And I think I was on the blocks, and that's one of the things like just ring the cash register. That'll attract more people than anybody.
yep,
And I think when you plan your company, whatever else, I don't subscribe. I love the stuff Alex Hormozy does. I like the Shark Tank from the drama standpoint. I don't know what Gary Vee does. I really am confused by his brand. But the but I don't think everyone should have the mindset we're going to get rich. The
yeah,
truth is, replace what you could have made in a W-2, and you're killing it.
yeah, yeah.
Like, you're
Absolutely,
absolutely murdering it. If you made 150 a
absolutely.
year and you're like, I can make 150 a year on my own, you're killing it. Just
Yeah,
keep that perspective in mind.
yeah.
You don't, because you don't report to anyone but yourself
Yeah,
and your
absolutely. And the
customers.
other thing is also the fact that you're allowing yourself to democratize what you know. Like the basic thing is when you're working for a
Right.
company, the only thing you're adding value to is the stockholders of that company. You're not actually helping anybody outside of that. When you are actually on your own and you're able to work for different companies or different clients or different people, the benefit of that is huge because you're able to take whatever it is that's unique to you and important and being able to apply it to a much larger base, and you're able to help far more people. Like I didn't create pallet because I wanted to become rich. I created pallet because I kept seeing things falling through the cracks. I kept seeing things in the traditional market that I just didn't agree with. And I kept seeing situations where people would get excited and then everything would collapse at the end. And I'm just like, I don't want that for people. I don't want people to go through those really painful stretches trying to get something up and running that they need for their business and being scared of that. I'm like, I'd much rather get you up and running and get you a benefit, because
Right on.
that keeps you in business, that keeps your people in payroll, that keeps all of that stuff going. I've seen too many people get churned in the machine. I don't want to be the person responsible for that. I want to be the person who tries to fight against that, regardless of who asked me to help them.
Yep. I love that. Thank you so much for coming on today. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Get a hold of you at pallet, PALETTE analytics.net. It's on the screen. If you're listening, check it out. Kurt, thank you. As a fellow Alpharetian, is it Alpharetian? Alpharetian.
I think it's up. I don't know.
It's going to be warm here next week. That's all I know. It's in January when we're filming this. Thank you so much. I'm going to put you in the periwinkle room. I'll be right back with you. Let me say goodbye, and I'll grab you real quick. Okay. Thank you. For everyone who made it this far in the show, thank you all once again for listening. Just take a moment, hit the follow button. You get the latest episodes that way. It's really important for the guests to get their missions out, because the more people that listen, the more times Apple and Spotify recommend it, and it helps us move our mission forward to help entrepreneurs cut the tide of everything holding them back. Thank you for listening. Until next time.